is what we're going to start with today. We're going to start with a couple of quick introductions so I can explain who I am, so I can explain who our guest presenter Roy is, where he comes from, and what he's currently working on and focusing on. And then after that, we'll give a brief GuardDuty introduction presentation. So I'll pull up some quick slides from my introduction to AWS security course so I can show you what GuardDuty is, what kind of data it ingests, what kind of features it supports, what services it supports, things like that, just important concepts to understand. And then after that, we'll dive into Cybr's sandbox environment for GuardDuty, where we'll actually launch an AWS environment. We'll go into the GuardDuty service and we'll generate sample findings so you can see exactly what they look like. They look like real findings, but they're just sample findings that you can also generate in your own AWS environment and account if you're interested in practicing and using GuardDuty. So don't feel like, if you don't have a Cybr Premium membership, don't feel like you can't participate in this presentation. Definitely feel free to spin up your own AWS environment, log into that, and you'll be able to follow step by step. Just as a heads up, GuardDuty has a free 30-day trial, so you can definitely do that. And then after that, I'll hand the reins over to Roy for a presentation on Orca security, so we can talk about what that is. And then he'll also be performing a hands-on demonstration of what Orca security is, how it compares to a service like GuardDuty, and how they're also sometimes complementary. So I think this is going to be a fun presentation. We're going to try to keep it to about 30 to 45 minutes. We'll see how it goes. Open it up to Q&A, which we always do with webinars like these if you've ever attended before. So if you have any questions, there is a way for you to ask those questions through the webinar software. I think it's called Q&A. Feel free to submit those at any point in time during the presentation. It'll just build the backlog, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go along. And we'll either answer those right away or we'll wait till the very end and answer them depending on the question. So feel free to do that. We love when people are engaging with us through these presentations. So here are our beautiful mugshots. Roy, I'll hand the mic over to you. Please get us started with your introduction. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Roy Long. I'm the founder and cloud evangelist of skyPurple Cloud. I've been working in cloud for about 7 years now. I'm the company skyPurple Cloud is about 2 years old in its current form, but I've been working under the auspices of skyPurple Cloud for the last just over 7 years. I've got 30 years experience working in IT in general in the healthcare sector. Come from a big pharma company, which is now a kind of multi-billion-dollar company, and I started when they were like about a $1 million company. I'm cloud certified security professional. That's a CCSP ISC squared qualification. Also AWS solution architect professional, and ACE Aviatrix multi-cloud networking professional as well. That's me in a nutshell. Oh, and there was a keen surfer. Yeah, so I surf when I'm not in the office.
Let's not forget that very important point. I remember seeing that picture on LinkedIn coming through of you surfing, and I still need you to teach me how to do that at some point in time. So we'll have to meet up. And I've never surfed before, but I've always wanted to try it. Perfect. Thank you for the presentation. Feel free to connect with either of us on LinkedIn. By the way, we're very easy to find. Roy Long on LinkedIn and Christophe Lempeler on there as well. But hey, I'm Christophe. I'm the founder and trainer at Cybr. I have about 7 or 8 years of AWS experience, and I actually got started primarily in web development and building web applications. Started back when there weren't as many frameworks as there are today. And so I got burned a few times with trying to secure those web applications, with issues with XSS, SQL injection, and so on. And that's kind of what got me started in application security to begin with. But then I kept hearing about this AWS cloud thing and how popular it was becoming. And so I wanted to learn more about what that was, how it worked, and so on. And so I dived into the world of Amazon Web Services and never looked back, kind of fell in love with it, which is something that's been super fun. And it's grown ever since. So I've kept focusing on that. I also live in Colorado near the Denver area. So if any of you are in this area, or if you're swinging by, traveling, I'd love to grab a coffee or drink or go hiking. That's a pretty popular thing to do around here, especially as you can see in my picture here. I enjoy doing sometimes I like the calmer stuff. Sometimes I like the rougher terrain. So I'm always open for any of that stuff. But enough about our introductions. Let's get into the meat of what we're here to talk about today. which is talking about GuardDuty threat detection and then comparing that to an Orca security solution, which is a third-party provider. So GuardDuty is an AWS native service versus Orca security is going to give you that third-party option that we can compare to. So at this point, I'm going to switch over to a slightly different slide. Oh, wrong window. Actually, can I switch it here? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so I didn't want to recreate this slide because there was really no point in doing that. These slides are straight from my introduction to AWS security course. So if you are a Cybr member already, you already have access to this lesson. Feel free to go to that lesson afterwards to follow up with this. If you don't, then you'll get to see that for free today, which is awesome. So Amazon GuardDuty, in a nutshell, provides us with cloud-based intelligent threat detection and protection. It's able to take a look at a variety of sources within our AWS environments and continuously monitor those sources for things like compromised accounts, anomalous behavior, and even malware. And it does that, like I said, by ingesting a ton of data from multiple different sources and services, which we'll take a look at in just a second. It takes that data, it aggregates it together, and then it uses threat intelligence to be able to analyze that aggregated data and then give us findings by saying, hey, this looks suspicious. Maybe it's a potential low severity issue, but you should take a look at it. Or maybe it's a medium severity issue or a high severity issue. You should definitely take a look at that and remediate it. As I was saying, GuardDuty can ingest data from many different sources. One of the primary AWS security services that you can use is called CloudTrail, which provides API and non-API logging. And so with GuardDuty, it's able to ingest all the data from CloudTrail management and data events. It's also able to ingest DNS logs data from Route 53 and VPC flow logs from the VPC service. In addition to that, AWS more recently launched some additional support for service-specific features. So if you're using EKS running Kubernetes on AWS, it's able to also ingest data from Kubernetes audit logs. It's able to look at RDS login activity to see if there's any kind of suspicious login activity for the Amazon RDS service, which is one of their really popular relational database service. It's able to take a look at S3 logs. It's also able to take a look at EBS volumes, which is where we start to see some of the malware detection that comes in. Same thing with runtime monitoring. And finally, Lambda network activity logs. I'm pretty sure they're working on some additional functionality. Like this is a relatively new service, we'll say. And so they keep adding features and functionality to it. But at the time of creating the slideshow, these were the supported services and features. I'll skip past this quick animation here. And so as I was saying earlier, once it ingests, aggregates, and analyzes that data, it does its best to try and give that finding a severity level. So as an example of a low severity level, it might tell you, hey, it looks like somebody's trying to brute force SSH access to one of your EC2 instances. Probably not a massive deal as long as you're implementing SSH properly for your instances. But at the same time, this could tell you, hey, as a remediation, maybe I need to narrow down what IP addresses or IP ranges are able to even try to SSH as an example, but it's not going to be some sort of critical vulnerability or finding rather. Then as an example of a higher level priority finding, we may, or GuardDuty may have detected that or think that there's a backdoor malware within one of your EC2 instances based on command and control activity that has been detected from requests. Or as a medium example, you may have somebody that's accessed one of your EC2 instances from a known malicious IP address. And so in that case, you probably want to take a look at that. So those are just some examples of low, medium, and high. And again, when it comes to being more actionable on data like this, GuardDuty helps us prioritize this. So by giving it those severities, it's able to tell us, hey, you should probably take a look at these before you take a look at some of the other issues. To be able to take a look at those issues like we were just talking about, we have a few different options. The main one, of course, to get started with is going to be the AWS Management Console. So that's going to be the GUI interface. You can log into your account, pull up GuardDuty, and see exactly what's going on in there, which is what we'll do in our presentation in a second. But beyond that, and for more advanced integrations, you can also plug in GuardDuty directly into event management or workflow systems, whether they're third party, as we'll take a look at, or whether they're even still native to AWS. For example, Security Hub is a really good example of that. You can use a lot of these services together. So you can have GuardDuty talking to Security Hub, and Security Hub is ingesting data from there and many other sources. And so, yeah, it's a pretty flexible service in that regard because we can access its API and do a whole lot of stuff, including also hooking it up to something like AWS Lambda in order to try and perform, in some cases, some automatic remediation or prevention, or even using Lambda to try and enrich findings by adding additional details and things like that. Just some quick examples before we move on to the hands-on demo here. These are just 5 examples. I think I got these from the AWS documentation. They kind of provide a variety of different use cases for why you'd want to use something like this. We already talked about some of it, like compromised credentials or even blocking known malicious IP addresses, things like that. But GuardDuty can also help you detect attempts or successful data S3 or S3 data exfiltration based on things like unusual geolocation. So if you only have US-based employees and only US-based employees are accessing that S3 bucket and S3 objects, but out of nowhere, somebody from Russia is performing a lot of downloads from your S3 buckets, then GuardDuty might look at that and say, hey, this is not normal. Something's going on. You should definitely investigate this. So these are just some examples, but again, we're going to be taking a look at we're not going to look individually at over 100 findings, but we will be looking at multiple different findings in the AWS console here in just a second. But as I transition to that, I'm going to take a look and see if there's any questions coming through the Q&A. And if there are no questions yet, feel free to take this time to go ahead and submit those questions as I spin up the Sandbox Lab, which takes about 50 to 60 seconds. So if you have any questions so far, I know I kind of went through that presentation really quickly, but the point of it is to cover the concepts and then move on to the hands-on. So if you have any questions so far, please let me know and submit those in the Q&A, and I'll be happy to take a look at that. And while I'm doing that, let me go ahead and pull this up. If, like I mentioned earlier, if you are a Cybr Premium member, you already have access to this hands-on lab. It's in the Introduction to AWS Security course. It's called Lab Demo Enable Threat Detection with GuardDuty. You can click on that lesson. You'll see this box right here, and then you'll be able to click on Start Lab. And like I said, it takes about 50-ish seconds to return the credentials. This is a pretty quick lab to spin up. And then once we have those credentials, I'll pop them into this browser window here, and we'll dive into the AWS console. All right, we have a question from Roy himself. Okay, let me go ahead and broadcast this. Oh, you already did that. Perfect. So the question is, what threat database does GuardDuty use? And did you want to answer your own question as well, or were you asking legitimately? Okay, go ahead. You're still muted.
No. I want you to answer, yeah, because I was curious what one it uses.
Perfect. So as we'll see, there's a couple of options, right? Primarily, AWS supports or provides their own threat intelligence through GuardDuty. So as I was talking about earlier, when we're talking about malicious IP addresses, AWS already provides some of that for you based on their own threat intelligence database. However, you can also go in and you can add some of your own known malicious IP addresses if you want. And you can also create an allow list of IP addresses. And so I'm getting a little bit ahead here, but as an example, if you have a corporate IP address that you want to add into GuardDuty, it will literally just ignore any finding that is coming and being generated from that IP address. So you have the ability to create those allow lists as well. So you can kind of tweak it just a little bit, but primarily that threat intelligence is coming from Amazon Web Services themselves. Another good question we have here from, is it Rimpal? Hopefully I said that name correctly. Let me go ahead and broadcast this. There we go. So the question is, how does GuardDuty database keep track of the newest and latest malware family in the database, and how frequently is it getting updated? That's a really good question. To answer that question, let's go ahead and dive into this console because that's part of that presentation. So if you see the credentials here, you can grab this URL, you can pop them into your favorite browser. I'm using Firefox in this case, but you can use anything you want. We're going to paste in the provided username and paste in the provided password, and then we'll click on sign in. From there, I'm going to make this bigger. So that's our primary focus. And then I'll go straight to the GuardDuty console. So because I had that question asked, I'm going to skip ahead to that really quickly. But before I do that, I just want to give a quick example of what the dashboard looks like. So far, we don't have anything. This is a clean slate, a clean lab environment. So we're going to have 0 total findings, 0 high severity, and so on. We're not going to have any data populated in this dashboard. Of course, as you use this, this would get populated, and it can give you that high-level overview of here's what the health of your environment currently looks like. And it, again, helps you kind of prioritize based on the severity. But if we go over to, I believe it's under lists. Yep. So under list management, under settings, and by the way, is this big enough? Do I need to zoom in, or is this legible? Are we good?
I think it looks fine.
Okay, perfect. So here you can see we have that list management, which says that GuardDuty does not generate findings for IP addresses that are included in the trusted IP list. So you can add trusted IP lists here, and it will ignore any findings from that IP address. So of course, be very careful in using this. You'd want to use it if it's producing a lot of false positives, of course, but otherwise you want to try and limit how many IP addresses you'd put into here. But then you also have your own threat IP list that you can upload to AWS, and they'll add this in addition to any other threat intelligence that they're already providing through the service. If we then go to settings, I think it's in. No, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Where is it? Actually, I think yeah. I was going to show that, but it's actually not directly in GuardDuty. So if you're using something like Amazon Inspector, that's where you can take a look at. They provide that search where you can see what CVEs they currently have added to the service. They don't actually show you that in GuardDuty, which is surprising. I feel like they should probably add that to the service here. I don't have access to Inspector through this lab, so I can't demonstrate that here. But if you use a service like Amazon Inspector, you can actually see what threats they have in their database, and you can compare that to a CVE list and database, and you can literally type in the CVE ID in there, and they'll tell you whether they support it or not. In terms of GuardDuty, I would imagine that it's a fairly similar database, and so they keep that very, very well updated, but they don't actually publish, at least as far as I know. If somebody has a source where they publish that information, let me know. But as far as I know, they don't publish that list through the GuardDuty service, which, now that I think about it, they should probably do that. That might be some feedback that we can send to them and see if they can implement that. So that's a really good question. Okay, so moving on, and feel free to keep adding questions. We'll take a look at them as we go through. Moving on, I'm going to quickly go through the links that we have in the dashboard here, and then we'll generate those findings and take a look at that. So once we generate the findings, this is where you'll be able to see those findings. As you can see, we don't currently have anything because this is a blank slate. We'll come back to this. Under usage, for this lab, I don't provide usage information that you can view for no particular reason, just to kind of simulate what you might see in a corporate setup. But here you would be able to see what your billing's going to look like, how many findings, just general usage statistics. On this tab here, you can start on-demand malware scans. So if you, for whatever reason, think that there might be something going on with one of your deployed EC2 instances, then you could start a new on-demand scan for that specific instance, and it would go through and take a look at it. GuardDuty does provide continuous threat monitoring and detection, but there are some features that also provide this on-demand scanning as an example. Then you have protection plans. So the reason that these protection plans are separated, even though I showed that GuardDuty supports all of these protection plans, is because they're priced differently. So as you can see here, we are part of a free 30-day trial, but after that 30-day trial, you would get charged additional pricing for S3 protection versus for EKS protection, malware protection even, RDS protection, and Lambda protection. So if you don't need it for one service or another, maybe you don't use that service, maybe you don't feel like you need it for that service, or maybe you have a third-party tool for that specific service, like RDS, for example, then in that case, you could disable that protection to lower your bill, because GuardDuty can get kind of pricey the more you use it. So I feel like it's a service that's probably primarily designed, pricing-wise anyway, for small to medium businesses. For larger enterprise, it can start to become cost prohibitive. And I don't know if Roy's going to touch on that with Orca security or not, but that is something to keep in mind. Then, of course, you have account settings. This is primarily if you are using AWS organizations and you have multiple child or member AWS accounts. So this is one of those services that you could run in your security tooling account for centralized GuardDuty threat detection. And then that's also deployed to individual member accounts and feeding that information to that central account. You can manage that from this panel here. Okay, so let's go over to settings and scroll down until we see sample findings, and then we'll click on generate sample findings. From there, it's going to take just a few seconds. It's really not that much time. Then we can go over to findings, and we'll see that we have over 172 generated findings in our environment here. Let me go ahead and try to make this bigger so we can see more of that. Okay. So as we were talking about, we have medium, low, and high. What we can do is we can filter based on lowest to highest severity or vice versa. And if we take a look at one of the sample high severity findings, here we have cryptocurrency mining detected on a Lambda function. This is possible because if we enable the VPC flow log data ingestion, then we're able to see that there's some suspicious activity either on your EC2 instances or even in this case, AWS Lambda functions. And then if we make this a little bit bigger, you can click on these individual findings and you can get a lot more information. You can get a brief description of why this was detected, of what's going on, related IP addresses, additional information you can click on here to understand better what this finding is. Then below that, you also have a link that says investigate with detective. That's not part of this lab here. We have a separate lab for using something like detective. However, if you want to use GuardDuty with detective, it does enrich this. It does give you additional information so you can deep dive a little bit further into what this finding looks like. But it also gives you a high level overview of what's going on. And then you can see more information in the overview section. Again, we have the severity of high, we have the specific region, how many times this was found or detected, the exact account ID. Again, this is important if you have a multi-account organization. That way you can separate it and understand which account this was detected in. The resource ID, the creation and updated dates. We have resources affected. So again, in this case, it's AWS Lambda. You get the exact function name where this was detected, the exact function version, description, etc. If there's a subnet that's related to that, you'll see that there, security group information, etc. The action that triggered this finding. So in this case, it's a network connection that was outbound, which makes sense for cryptocurrency. We can see the actor IP address as well as the port number used, general geolocation information, and some additional data and things like that. So this is one example out of 172 that you can go through and kind of get familiar with as you're learning about GuardDuty. As another example here, we have Kubernetes malicious file. We have another Kubernetes detection persistence, credential access for RDS, anomalous behavior, successful login, and so on and so forth. So you can see this is quite a bit of information and quite a bit of data from that one single service, which you can then hook up to things like Amazon Detective. You can hook up to AWS Security Hub, or again, you can hook up to a third-party solution. Maybe it's a SIEM or something like that. You can trigger SOAR workflows and so on. If you're going through and you're looking at some of these, especially if it's say a low severity finding, like maybe something like this, you remember, oh, this is actually a test that I did the other day or something like that, then you could suppress it. The button's kind of smushed if I don't close this, but you are able to suppress some of these findings, right? These tools aren't perfect. They're going to have false positives. Like I was talking about, maybe it's one of your employees is testing something and they tested it in the wrong account or whatever the reason may be. It may generate a finding that's incorrect. And so in that case, you do have the ability to also suppress findings. Any questions? Roy, anything to add on this so far?
No, that's great. I think you're going to just mention about pushing these into Security Hub as well, right?
Yes. So I'm not going to demonstrate that in this specific lab here, but so Security Hub is able to ingest data from multiple different services, kind of like how GuardDuty is able to ingest from multiple native services. But Security Hub would be able to take data from these GuardDuty findings and then provide them in the Security Hub dashboard. And then from there, that will affect your security score within AWS, right? They support running or checking your AWS environments against multiple different security frameworks like the CIS framework, even some of the AWS best practices and architecture review. All of that is fed into Security Hub. And so as some of these findings come in, it can plug into those third-party tools like your SIEM, SOAR, or many third-party vendor solutions, all the way from simple tools to massive complex tooling that you can hook up to your AWS environments. And from there, you can also do things like enrich the data or suppress findings as well, and so on. So yeah, Security Hub is kind of another beast that we have some training for in the course, and that we honestly should probably also do a separate webinar for. But these services are absolutely designed to work together. And as time goes on, AWS keeps pushing more and more features and updates to make sure that those integrations work really well together. And these services are meant to work together in that regard. Anything to add to that, Roy?
No, that's good. Thanks. Yeah.
So we got a question from Chris, and then I will hand this over to you, Roy. So one of the questions is, can AWS GuardDuty detect zero-day exploits thanks to machine learning? Let me project this. So honestly, that would probably be a really good question for AWS themselves. I'd be curious to hear what the people who are working on this service would tell you. My answer is going to be no, just because even though it has intelligence built into it, that intelligence is primarily built in to check your resources and your environments against what they have in their threat database. And that way they're able to scan your environments and they're able to assign a severity score. They're able to enrich the finding with that information that we're looking at, like the IP address, the port, all of that stuff. To me, my understanding, that's where that machine learning threat intelligence comes into play. It's not necessarily finding things like 0 days or any of that. So my answer would be no. It's not going to be able to find things like that. But I would be curious to hear what the engineers working on the service would respond to that.
I can add to that as well. I think it, from a point of view of detecting anomalous behavior, it will actually detect some of that behavior. So if the zero-day exploit compromises the system in such a way that it shows up as anomalous behavior, then it will absolutely detect it and show up in your findings.
That's a really good addition. Like when we're going back to known malicious IP addresses, even if it doesn't necessarily detect the zero-day exploit itself, it could detect that something fishy is going on in your account, and then that would lead you to detecting the zero-day exploit. So that's a really good addition. And then the next question we have before we move forward here is, let me project this. Are there is these findings need to be individually treated? Is it some AWS native option to treat multiple high severity findings in automated way? So yes and no. It really depends on the finding itself. There are some findings that usually for the most part, if there's a finding, you probably want to have some sort of human checking redundancy. However, if it's a very low severity impact finding, like maybe if it's something like they detected SSH brute force attempt. If there's an SSH brute force attempt going on, it's probably because you misconfigured either your security groups or network access control lists. In that case, if your security posture or your organization is so mature to the point where they feel comfortable automatically remediating that, you could set up automated remediation. You could use GuardDuty hooked up to those other services we were talking about, like AWS Lambda functions, for example. There's also AWS config that can work with systems manager and so on. There's a few different integrations, but you could set those up to automatically remediate that by automatically updating a security group or a NACL configuration. That, of course, again, I mentioned the word maturity, because getting to the point where you're comfortable automatically remediating issues like that without causing production outages is a pretty big leap forward in terms of security maturity. So the answer is yes. There are many ways for you to automatically remediate one or more of these findings. But at the end of the day, you probably won't start there. And even once you get to that level, you would want to have a really good logging structure, so you can go back and say, hey, this is what happened at this date, at this time. This is the automatic remediation that happened, and that broke this, and now there's a production outage. We need to be able to trace back those steps. So probably a long-winded answer to that, but yes and no. It kind of depends on the specific use case for that. Okay. Are we ready to move forward and talk about an alternative option that also complements this? We ready, Roy?
I think we are. Yeah, I think we are. So I think what you said about security posture kind of and maturity kind of leads directly into what I'm going to talk about here, Christoph. So yeah, if you can just bring up the slides, then I'll just literally whiz through the 3 slides that I've got, just so I can get onto the demo and get some value.
All right, 1 second. Okay.
Right. So for those who don't know what cloud security posture management is, it's basically the area of security within cloud which involves continuously monitoring and assessing the security posture of your cloud environment. So CSPM solutions, third-party solutions, often use a combination of automated tools and manual processes to identify and remediate those risks. And most modern CSPM solutions also provide multiple compliance frameworks. And I think you touched on one of those, Christoph, about NIST and a few other things that you can risk assess your compliance against those particular frameworks. And a lot of CSPM solutions include those in the solution for you to actually assess your risk against them. Next slide, thanks. Is it updating? There we go. Right, so the key cloud security posture management concepts I'm going to cover today are asset discovery and classification, continuous security assessments, whereby the tool continuously assesses the configurations, vulnerabilities, malware, and compliance violations within your particular cloud environment or environments. Security recommendations, so the tool will actually provide recommendations and remediations along with the findings. And one of the things that's currently coming to the fore with these CSPM solutions is the integration with these generative AI tools. So things like OpenAI, ChatGPT, Amazon Bedrock, Orca, that I'm going to speak and demo in a minute, is tightly integrated now with some of those ML services to actually provide some good remediation suggestions on the back of a bunch of training data. And compliance reporting. So if you're working in a compliant environment, a regulatory environment in an industry that has high standards and regulations around computing cloud area, then this is going to be a really good tool to give you that assessment on your compliance and where you sit with respect to your regulations. Next one, please, Christoph. Right, so I think I'll whiz over this one. So why is CSPM important? I think it's quite obvious, right? So you can obviously improve visibility into your cloud security, identify and remediate any potential risks or vulnerabilities. And again, I keep saying it, compliance, right? This tool really helps with compliance and ensuring you're compliant with your industry regulations. And I think I'll jump into the demo now, if that's all my slides. I think that's all my slides, right, Christoph?
You've got the comparison at the end there, but I think you meant to save that for
Yeah, I'll go back to that afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go back
So
to
I'll
that
stop
afterwards.
sharing then, and you should be able to share your screen. Let me know if not.
Let me share my screen. I will share my entire screen because I've only got this one thing open. Right, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. Right, so this is basically the jumping in point for any CSPM solution. You get a bunch of dashboards. They give you information related to your security posture, and they give you the risk assessments, the risk categories. Very similar in the risk assessment statuses to GuardDuty that Christoph's just shown you. If I go to this dashboard here, you can see that you've got a bunch of different metrics and graphs which show you what the status and your your ability to close out your vulnerabilities is. So this is really important if you're in a, like I say, a regulated environment, or where you've got a company that's keen on auditing the security posture. You can see where you are with respect to your risk, how many open risks you have. Up in the top left-hand corner here, you can see these marked as imminent compromise. So these are really key findings that say you really should be looking at these things and these configurations or these misconfigurations in your cloud account, which really indicate areas that you can then kind of dig down and focus on. I'm just going to click on this one first, just to give you some kind of brief insights into what kind of findings I've got here. So we've got some containers. You can see the asset here is marked as a container. So we've got some containers that has some vulnerabilities. You can see I've got both Google here, Google Cloud Platform, and AWS. So one of the benefits of CSPM solutions is they're not just tied to a single cloud. You can hook it up to, this one's hooked into AWS and Google. I've got 2 AWS accounts connected and 1 Google account. You can also connect it to Azure. I think Alibaba is supported as well. And there's actually a government tenant from Orca that allow you to look at the Gov Cloud within AWS and other cloud platforms as well. So I'm just going to go through a sequence of steps here, just so I can quickly run through and show you and get maximum value out of this, because I've put together some findings and some steps, so I can kind of go through and show you some in detail some of the findings. So from this view, one thing you can also do is you can set up business units. Up here, I've got a business unit called skyPurple Dev. What the business unit allows you to do is filter based on maybe the department or the area that the person's working in. So for example, if you've got somebody that is only allowed to see development instances, you can give them a read-only or an access view, which only allows them to see that one business unit called Dev. So if I click on this, you'll see that what it does is it reduces down the number of findings based on exactly those criteria. Now, this particular business unit is based on individual resource tags within AWS. So I've tagged stuff within AWS environment equals dev. And so it picks that up and pulls it into a separate business unit within the tool. So that's one of the really powerful features within this tool, is you can segregate and separate. You've got that separation of duties between different roles and different people who will be looking at this tool. Okay, so that's the business unit. I'm going to go back to the default view now, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create another business unit. I'm going to show you how easy it is to create a business unit here. So I just would create a business unit here. I would select the criteria under which I want to filter it. This one that I just mentioned is resource tag. I would pick the resource tag that I want to filter it under. All right. So let me just go back to this org dashboard as well. So on this one, what you'll see here is you've got the medium risk and low risk, similar again, and high risks up here. You can see how many you've got over time, what your rate is of closing out these issues, and you can then see how you're doing from perspective of closing out these issues. What you can also see from this next one here by category is how long does it take you to close out these issues. You can see we've got some malicious activity here, which is taking a long time to close out, right? So you can then use this data to focus and work out where you should be applying your resources to close out your security issues. Right, so let me go to the alert section now. The alert section is really important, really powerful, because it gives you that insight into, you know, the high, medium, low alerts that are found within the environment. You can see we've got a bunch of categories and findings here on the high alerts. These would be ordinarily the area you'd focus on. So you'd go to the high ones, prioritize your high alerts, dig into those, find out what they are, what it's showing you. You'd need obviously some kind of domain experience to understand what some of these are telling you. But this is where kind of the power of this tool in it comes in, because it actually leads you through some of this and it gives you some of the remediation steps within the tool itself. So let's have a look at some of these high findings here, and I'll give you some idea of the kind of things you can find. So we've got 3 high risk data at risk findings here. So I'm going to look at these, and I'm going to look at, so I've got S3 buckets with public access allowed. And so it's telling me I've got data at risk because I've got public access allowed on that bucket. So if I dig down into these, I can see the bucket name here within the AWS account. I can see I've got 2 buckets which have got public access. I can see the AWS account they're sitting within and the region. I can see that this was discovered 4 days ago and 1 month ago here. So this one was first discovered a month ago. Now this is a dev account. So I've got a bunch of findings which we leave in this account so we can show this tool and show all of the findings in kind of great detail. So we tend not to close these out. So it's not that we're not doing our job. It's just that we like to leave these findings so we've got something to show on demos and to people when they're looking at this tool. So I'm going to click on this one that says Project X here, and you know, imagine I'm somebody coming in here. I don't know what the teams are doing, building stuff in AWS. There's maybe a development team or a Project X team in this respect who are doing things in AWS, and I'm the security lead, and I come in here, I look into the details here, I find the high risks, and I then start digging down into these and work out what's going on. So if I click on this, I can get some more, you know, enriched information about this alert. And you can see that it's saying the summary is ensure your S3 buckets are not publicly accessible via bucket policies. And so it gives you some insights into what it's found and potentially what you can do to close out that issue. What you'll also notice is we've activated some experimental features here in this tool. This is not out of the box standard. You have to ask Orca to enable this feature, but basically what it gives you is the ability to close out or remediate these issues with the help of, you know, the training and the learning and the suggestions from ChatGPT. So if I click one of these, for example, console, how would I close this issue during the console? So it's going to send that, and it's going to send that. You can see the ChatGPT icon here. So it sends that to ChatGPT and it gets back a succinct list of the remediation steps to actually close that out. So let's just quickly look through this one. So we would go to the AWS console, navigate to S3, select the bucket, go to the permissions, click bucket policy, review the existing policy, identify any statements that allow public access. Now, you can see from that, if you know anything about AWS, you know that's kind of true, right? And so you wouldn't want to just rely on ChatGPT finding it, because I know for a fact that if I want to just close public access on this bucket, I would go to S3 and I would just click block public access, right? So it hasn't got that in here, but that's what I would do. Now, on the right-hand side, what you can also see is a lot of information related to this asset. You can see the asset score, which we've obviously identified as a high level alert. You can see there's internet facing, which is kind of always a big thing for us, is, you know, how many things do you really want to have internet facing, you know, and just let's identify all of those and close out as much as possible. You can see this thing called attack paths here. Now, the attack paths is a really useful feature, not specifically for this, because obviously with this S3 bucket, you can see what the attack path is, right? It's a public access to the bucket, the public bucket URL itself. But if we look on and click on attack paths, we can see that there are a number of different additional attack paths that are tied into this same issue. So you can see that we've got a potential attack path which actually implicates one of our EC2 instances. So, you know, from the point of view of not just looking at your cloud security posture, but actually tying the things together with other assets within your organization, it gives you kind of that understanding of, if somebody got into your environment and they compromised that S3 bucket, for example, let's say somebody uploaded some malicious file onto that S3 bucket. Well, we can see from this that we've got an like the SST machine, which is an EC2 instance here, which is actually connecting to that bucket, right? So if somebody uploads some malware to that, you can see they could upload it there. It could get potentially put onto that EC2 instance, right? And then you've got further attack paths based on this one attack path here. So if we look at this, you can see that we've got internet access here into the bucket, then it compromises this SST machine, right? Which then has some additional alerts assigned to it, but it also has some roles assigned to the EC2 instance itself, right? You can see it's got an SSM role. And then you can see from that, you can see the chain of kind of compromise from this instance right the way through to, the role that's being used, and then everything else that can be compromised from it. So you can see then that you've got multiple impacts from one single compromise. And again, like I say, that's the beauty of one of these CSPM solutions, is you can tie all that information together, and you can start digging into the information, and you can start finding these vulnerabilities and closing them out. So let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this EC2 instance that I've got. So if I go to this discovery view here, actually, let's go back to the alert, capture that in the same way. Let's look at the data at risk. Yeah, let's look at that compromise bucket. Let's look, oops, hang on. Let's look at that bucket there. And then let's go back to this attack path and find what that EC2 instance is. Okay, so that one there is that SST instance. Right, so what we can do from there is, if we go to that attack path, obviously you can see in more detail that SST machine here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to find more details out about that SST machine itself. And you can see there's even more kind of extensive compromise going on here, potentially from that one vulnerability. Obviously, this isn't compromised at the moment, but this is showing you what could possibly be compromised. So just to go back to the GuardDuty, this is not directly threat detection. This is threat prevention, right? So this, you look at your security posture, you work out where all your vulnerabilities are, and you close out those vulnerabilities. So if we go in here now, we can look at this instance detail, and we can get the information about that instance out of here, and we can see that we've got our IP address. We can see that we've also got, I think we've also got a public IP address on this one. So we've got a public IP address on this one. So you can get all that information about that instance, and then you could then go into the AWS account and then do some further investigation or close out these issues. Okay, are there any questions so far while I move on to the next section? Do we have any questions, Christoph?
We had one that just came in here. Let me project it. It says, how Orca provides solution for endpoint security and API security issues, how various exposed endpoints in public cloud is taken care by Orca?
Right, that's a great question, because Orca have just tied up with a company called Threat Optics, which actually do endpoint protection, but CSPM isn't really an endpoint protection service. It's more prevention. So you can detect vulnerabilities, you can prevent vulnerabilities, you can, and I'll go into this in a minute with inventory, but you can detect malware on EC2 instances. So you can kind of, if there's a compromise, you can detect it after the fact. Right? It doesn't do, like I say, it doesn't do threat detection, immediate detection and prevention. What it does is it actually prevents it happening in the first place and tells you about it after the fact, right? So it's a kind of, you need something in the middle there to do the endpoint detection, which is where this Threat Optics agent comes in. The Threat Optics agent, you can install it onto your endpoints, and then it feeds that information into Orca. What it also does is it helps protect that endpoint as well, detect and protect. So it acts as like a CloudStrike EDR kind of endpoint detection and protection.
I like this other question that just came in. Just as a heads up, we're at the 15-minute mark. I don't have a hard stop. Roy, I don't know what your situation is. I don't mind going a little bit over as long as people keep asking great questions. And
yeah, I'm good. I'm good for now. I can go a little bit over if we need to, Christoph.
Perfect. I like this question that just came in. This is good timing, I think. It asks, Wiz is very similar to Orca, hence the lawsuit from Orca. What are your thoughts on Orca versus Wiz from a competitive perspective?
Right. So let me go. When I answer that, let me go to the inventory section here. Right. So one of the key things about CSPM solution is the inventory and the cataloging and knowledge of everything that's in your cloud account. That's one of the key components, really key tenets of a CSPM solution. Now, what Orca does is it looks at virtual instances and containers, and it does something called side scanning, right? The side scanning it basically takes an EC2 instance, it will duplicate the EBS volume attached to that instance, it will ship it off to your own controlled account or to Orca controlled account, and it will scan it there. It will scan it for vulnerabilities, for malware. It will scan all the application components for any vulnerable libraries, things like that, right? That process is patented, right, by Orca. Wiz copied it, right, which is what the lawsuit's all about. Orca have the credentials to back it up. Right? They have the patents. They were assigned that patent for side scanning. Because I really don't know. I don't think anybody knows right now what's going to happen there. I mean, it could be that Wiz just license it. It could be to come to an agreement. But it is a really good question because it is a concern for some Wiz users out there.
It says, I wanted to call out that an often overlooked aspect of Orca is the DSPM capabilities. Macy looks at S3 for sensitive data, but Orca will search for sensitive data within databases and on EBS volumes as well. Very valuable.
Yeah, that's a newer feature of Orca. I think they added it a few months back. So I wasn't strictly going to cover that on this call. If somebody wants to contact me and walk through that functionality and understand how it works, then I'm more than willing to jump on a call after this at some kind of later stage. But basically, you're absolutely right. So the data security posture management, DSPM, is a critical piece of what Orca are now providing, and it does look through all of your data sources, not just databases, but it will look for data in all of your data stores, and it will look for sensitive information, access keys, anything potentially that hits kind of one of these configurations that looks like something that's of concern. So it's not 100% perfect like all these things. They use the filters and stuff to work out exactly if it looks like an access key, it will mark it as an access key, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is an access key or sensitive data. But if it looks like it, it will mark it. And so that's a really powerful feature of Orca now. That's a great question. Thanks for that. So anyway, so back to the inventory here. So you can look through your cloud accounts in the inventory section here of Orca, and you can see it's got various different categories: compute services, data storage, encryption and secrets, identity access, networking, organization, security monitoring. So each of these have subsections, so you can dig down into these. You can see information regarding access keys. Everything here is risk assessed as well. And this kind of brings me on to the part of the compliance, right? So you can see here in this column here, this is around the KMS keys, right? And it lists all of the related compliance frameworks for this particular finding here, right? And you can see there's a whole bunch of them, right? And more than you could ever kind of understand or imagine, right? But basically what you can do with Orca is you can risk assess your cloud environments against these compliance frameworks. So for example, if you're working in the retail industry and you need to be PCI DSS compliant, then this is where you could actually apply the PCI framework to your cloud accounts and start risk assessing against your particular industry specific regulatory frameworks. And to do that, Orca have made it really easy. Basically, you could just go into the compliance frameworks under the modules here, and you can see it lists all of the potential frameworks which you can then score or risk assess your environments against. Right, so you can see we've got, let's look for PCI DSS. You can see we're actually risk assessing against this already. It's turned on. You can just turn these on and off as you want, and then it will start building that data and actually start scoring. It takes probably about a good 10 to 12 hours to properly risk assess all your cloud environments, depending on the size of your cloud estate. But after that, you will then start seeing these findings coming into the compliance view here. Now, let me quickly switch to the compliance view. So you can see all of the risk frameworks that are listed here, all the compliance frameworks. You can see PCI DSS is listed here. 83% score against that one. I think I want to just walk through one of the others actually, which is PCI no, it's not PCI. It's ISO 27017, right? So ISO 27017 is basically information security code of practice specifically around cloud services. So let's look at that one. So here it is. ISO 27017. You can see our average score here is 77%, and you can see out of 1,253 rated findings, we're kind of 969 compliant. You can see there's a green tick against 969, if you can just about see that. So you can see on the right hand side which accounts are kind of the worst offenders. You can also see how much of those accounts, the red piece, is non-compliant, and you can drill down into these just by clicking on it. Again, that's the beauty of a solution like this, is you can just click through and it drills down, and the clicks drill down into all the findings. And so let's just look at this one here, cryptography, right? Because I looked at this one earlier and I just wanted to kind of pull some data out on this one. So when you have some findings here, you're non-compliant basically for some of these findings, you can work out exactly what it is in the environment that's making you non-compliant. And you can see in this instance, we've got untagged KMS customer managed keys. We've got EBS volumes not encrypted by a customer managed key, and we've got customer master key rotation disabled. So these are all risk compliance requirements for that particular industry, for that particular framework. So to comply with all of these, you would then go through your compliance frameworks here, you go through the compliance view, you find out what all your failures are, and you start closing them. And if it's a particular requirement for your industry, this is where you would focus your efforts, right? You'd focus your efforts on the area of compliance that is relevant to your industry. Again, I've got another one here, system acquisition development. I've got quite a high or quite a low score here really for this one. And you can see from this, we've got system change control procedures. You can see we failed on nearly all of our system change control procedures against this framework. That doesn't necessarily mean you're doing stuff bad. It just means if you need to be compliant with that framework, then you're failing, right? So for a lot of people out there who are not really in regulated industries, this is good information to have, but it's probably not critical to actually close these out priority. What I would focus on is, as I mentioned before, on the alerts and what are deemed to be high and medium kind of level alerts. Okay. Any questions on that piece? While I think I'm about to close out here. I think I've got a couple more things to go through if I've got time.
Yeah, that's perfect. We're running out of time here, but let's go ahead and start wrapping up, and then we'll pull up a quick comparison between what you just demoed here, which was awesome, versus GuardDuty and even expanding into Security Hub and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So the last thing unless we've got questions on this piece, the last thing I want to just cover is this shift left kind of philosophy, right? So I'm not sure if you're familiar with shift left, but it's the kind of philosophy around, pushing everything left towards the developers rather than waiting for things to break in an environment, stopping it getting into production or development or build and then deploy, stopping at that stage before it becomes an issue. So what Orca have done is they've provided some really great integrations with some of the key tools that people use in their deployment and development pipelines. And they've got this whole section called code security. They've got a whole section called image security, which is based around containers basically. And we've got a management section here with some built-in kind of default findings, which give you some idea of the kind of integrations and the findings you will find from integrating a tool like this with your development pipeline. And if we go to the project scan log here, you can see that what it's doing is it's integrating Orca with the build pipeline. So a developer comes along, they do their code, they push it to build, or using their Jenkins automation or whatever their tool they're using, Azure DevOps pipeline, something like that. You'll integrate it at the point where it does the build, and it will scan the code. It will scan what the code's going to do. If it's infrastructure as code, it will scan what the components are going to be deployed into your cloud environment, and it will say, you've got a problem here, or you've got some findings here. and it'll either stop the pipeline at that point and stop the build, or it will actually just inform the user that there's some findings they should really close out. You can see on this one, we've got 3 medium, 11 low, and then 8 informational. So if we just have a look at this one, you can see that what it's finding, this is the sort of thing it's finding. So it's a Docker file which has missing user information, right? Let me just close that window. There's networks not set here in the Docker compose file. Networks not set again in the Docker compose file. So these are the kind of findings it's going to find by shift left. So what you can do is you can integrate this with your process so that you're not deploying stuff into the account, finding the problems, then having to go back and fix them. You're stopping them getting in the first place. Okay, let's go back to the slide deck then, Christoph. I think that's it for the tool.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Roy. Really appreciate being able to look at it from that perspective. And I think, we'll talk about this here in just a second as I pull up this screen with our last slide. But what you'll probably have noticed is the quantity and the quality and the type of data that you get from a third-party solution like Orca versus just GuardDuty, right? And as I was talking about before, typically you'll use GuardDuty with something like Security Hub, and Security Hub offers a lot of those things we're looking at, but it's still going to be a more limited subset of features. And of course, you don't have multi-cloud support, whereas with Orca Security, you can also plug in your GCP and Azure environments. And a lot of people are moving to multi-cloud architectures. So that's another pretty big deal. But go ahead, Roy. I know this was your slide you put together.
Yeah, so I just wanted to really just compare and contrast. So I think rather than, and there was a comment earlier on LinkedIn, right? Why versus when they should be like complementary, right? That obviously the intent was comparing them, and so they are actually complementary. We in a lot of the customers we work with, we use GuardDuty and Amazon Inspector along with Orca Security to provide that comprehensive view and protection for cloud accounts. So obviously GuardDuty continuously monitors the CloudTrail logs, as Christoph quite greatly explained in his presentation and his demo. There's threat intelligence integration, and it's easy to deploy. Obviously it's already in your AWS account, so it's easy to deploy. You just click the button and it's switched on basically. Orca Security, on the other hand, it scans the entire cloud environment. It's also multi-cloud, as Christoph said. It looks for misconfigurations, vulnerabilities, and other security and compliance risks. It provides recommendations to remediate findings, and it provides a comprehensive view of your cloud security posture. So if you use them in combination, you've got the real-time threat detection intelligence, and you've got the comprehensive cloud security posture management and compliance.
Of course, at that point, one of the main issues that you could run into is cost prohibitive. And I think that's one of the main complaints I typically hear about GuardDuty. Once you get to a certain size, it does become fairly expensive. And so if you're running that plus then running another tool on top of that, then you may come to a decision where it's like, okay, we need one or the other, or maybe the budget can handle both. And so that's probably going to be one of the main considerations as you're looking at deploying one, the other, or even both combined, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I know we have a few other questions. Here's some resource links. You can probably Google those, so I won't stay on this slide very long. But if you need those afterwards, please let me know. Feel free to reach out. But otherwise, to wrap up here, I know we probably have a few more questions. Typically, we have some time for just dedicated Q&A. Because this presentation was a little bit longer, there's quite a bit more meat to it. We don't really have the time to do that today. So we'll show you a slide here in a second of how you can reach out to either Roy or myself to follow up with some of those questions. And I'm sure if you have a business need for Orca Security, Roy would be more than happy to actually set up a demonstration with you. But Roy, if you want to briefly explain what skyPurple Cloud is about.
Yes, so we're a cloud services company. We're an Orca security partner. We provide what we call a low-cost, light-touch solution on top of Orca. So for companies or people that don't have the experience to manage it themselves, we can come in, deploy Orca, and actually manage it for companies, providing leadership, dashboards and updates. We're actually, as a team, we've got a team of really expert cloud professionals who do a multitude of have a multitude of cloud skills in refactoring, migration, and machine learning. A lot of my team were actually involved in architecting the machine learning solution for the UK MHRA, which was actually critical in identifying some of the adverse events in the vaccine data during the pandemic. So we've got quite good ML credentials there. And that's all I want to say for that, really. I want to try and take that question, the last question on the, if I can, Chris, I've forgotten enough time. There's a question about data sovereignty regarding Orca. Can I just take that question?
Go for it.
So with Orca, because it's a great question, because there's always that concern about data sovereignty, because Orca does capture your information, it stores it in their own portal. So when you log into Orca, you have a choice between the different regions that you can pick for your particular tenant, right? So if you're in the EU, you pick the EU tenant. If you're in the US, you pick the US tenant. There are various other tenants as well, like the GovCloud tenant and other kind of regional specific tenants. So that's one thing. But I think the important thing is, and the last part of the question is about the EBS duplication, because obviously it does take a copy of your data and it does scan it, doing the side scanning. Now, there's two ways of doing that. One is you can let Orca do that on their environment at their cost, or you can actually set up your own AWS account. And then what happens is that side scanning is done in your own account. So you actually for one customer, we have an Orca security account where we do all of the side scanning. So all of the EBS volumes are shipped to that account under our own control, and they're scanned there. So that kind of, I hope that answers that question.
And then about Cybr, as we wrap up here. So if you're not familiar, Cybr.com, we do AWS cloud security training. And so if you enjoy this presentation, learning about GuardDuty, we have training on GuardDuty specifically. We're actually going to start working on a course dedicated to deep diving into GuardDuty and really talking about not only how to use that tool like we saw today, but also how to integrate it with those other services to enhance it. We also have training on just general introduction to AWS security that covers a lot of these different services at a little bit of a higher level, but also a practical level. And then we have a pen testing AWS security course. I'm actively working on a CloudTrail course, and we'll also have some certification content coming out pretty soon here for AWS specifically. So if you individually want training on AWS security, check us out. Otherwise, if you also need team training of any size from 2 onwards, I'm happy to schedule a call and demo and kind of show you more of how the platform works and how the hands-on lab functionality works as well. And then other than that, thank you so much for attending. Please feel free to connect with us. LinkedIn is one of the platforms that I'm the most active on. I know, Roy, I see you posting there frequently as well. So I know you're very active there. So if you want to connect with us with any follow-up questions, please feel free to do that. I know Roy also included some QR codes on the screen here, so you can easily reach out to him if you have any follow-up questions about anything we talked about today, GuardDuty, Orca security, any of the above. And likewise for me, I'm not an Orca security expert. I'll defer to Roy for that. But for anything AWS native or AWS security native, please feel free to reach out with questions to me as well. Anything you wanted to add, Roy?
No, that's great. Thanks, Crystal. Tied it up nicely.
Thank you so much for doing this today. I enjoyed learning about Orca security and seeing through the demonstration. I appreciate you taking the time to do this and to share with us today. So yeah, thank you for scheduling this with. I know we've been talking about this for a couple of months now. I'm glad we're able to make it happen before the end of the year. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Awesome. You're welcome. Thanks, Christoph.
One other quick thing, if you're going to reInvent, I will be there. Roy will be there. So maybe you can connect with him and try to meet up there too.
I will be at reInvent, my 6th, I think my 6th. Yeah, my 6th this year.
That's a lot of reInvents.
My 6th in person.
Would you say they've changed at all in the last, because I haven't been in the last 2-3 years. Have they changed at all since COVID or not so much?
So the 2017 was what I say quite small compared to what it was in 2018. 2018, 2019 were massive. Obviously 2020 was cancelled. 2021 was only about 10,000 or so people, I think, attending. Well, it was vastly reduced. But 2022 last year started getting back to what it was before. So I think this year is going to be, I think it's going to be a big one this year.
And when you say big, it's a madhouse when it's at full capacity. it's a whole city.
Yeah, I think it was 60,000 people there were 60,000 attendees last year, along with all the AWS staff from all around the world that are there as well, and all the vendors and everybody.
It's a good time. I mean, it is exhausting, especially if you're a vendor and if you have a booth or something like that. I mean, you start losing your voice on day one, so it's a challenge. But otherwise, it's just a lot of fun, and you get to meet people in person that you may have chatted online only with, and meet customers, meet partners. It's a really fun time. I'll have to. I'm gonna do my best next year to go. I just wasn't able to go this year, so hopefully we'll get to meet in person at that point. But anyway,
Yeah,
thanks
let's hope
again.
so.
I won't take any more of your time for the attendees or you, Roy. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. If you have any questions, reach out. But otherwise, hope you have a great rest of your either morning, evening, or day. Talk to you all later and see you in the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.